episode of Off the Shelf is brought to us by Busy Bee Vegan Skincare. Busy Bee is an all-natural skincare line dedicated to healthy, vegan, plant-based skincare and overall wellness. They offer a selection of handcrafted body scrubs, butters, and washes that not only make your skin glow but smell amazing. Their unique all-natural scents include gingerbread, ruby grapefruit, caramel cake, and morning latte. So why not treat your skin to something fresh and all-natural? Head on over to shopbusybeevegan.com today. And as a special bonus, Busy Bee is offering listeners of this podcast a 15% discount on your first order with the code OrdinaryPodcasts. Thanks for listening and enjoy this week's episode of Off the Shelf. Hello everyone, welcome back to Off the Shelf, the podcast where we take books off of our shelves and into our hearts. And welcome to our final review, wrap-up, and dish on our read for November, Malinda Lo's Last Night at the Telegraph Club. Before I get started here, I do just want to give a small disclaimer and say that this wrap-up might feel just a little bit scattered. Something I want to talk about today is just how much this book has going on in it at once. It was one of my favorite aspects of it, actually, how masterfully Lo has woven and unified everything in together, but it does make it a bit hard to focus on any one small detail. Because of how everything is so interconnected, to focus on just one side of any of the conflicts or challenges the characters face, I think would be to misunderstand the whole picture, how and why those experiences impact them in the way they do. But let's not get too worried about it just yet, before we even try to dive in. Let's just let Lo's book take us back in time a few steps together, and see where we end up. To give us all a little bit of a refresher, Last Night at the Telegraph Club takes place in 1954 San Francisco, and it focuses on Lily Hu, a Chinese-American teenager who is coming of age in an extremely politically and socially charged moment. Not an easy thing for anyone, but especially for a girl who is told at every turn that everything she's coming to learn about herself, as she grows up, is something wrong. She's both a visible minority and an invisible one. Her Chinese heritage marks her as other in a society sensitive to anyone who looks different, and her interest in space, science, and math often singles her out in classes full of boys. She is also a girl coming to recognize and come to terms with her attraction to other girls. Already, the intersections of these few factors of her identity multiply how severely she feels watched, and under scrutiny, always, every single day. The book largely follows a personal journey of self-discovery for Lily. She is slowly coming into herself, understanding what it means to her to be Chinese, to be a woman pursuing a field largely male-dominated, to be a lesbian. What we also get is a really powerful picture of what it means to us when we're able to find community with others who are also apart from what is considered to be the norm. For Lily, though, that community remains a bit shaky. The overlapping pieces of her identity make it difficult for her to find belonging within any one place, because within those spaces, another piece of her always seems to overshadow the part that belongs, wherever she is. The story tells of communities and individuals, still growing, still learning, and still imperfect, but progressing nonetheless. Most importantly of all, maybe, I think what Lo has done really beautifully here is quite simple, but quite difficult to do at times. She's told the truth. The beginning of this book shows Lily to us as a girl who is, in many ways, held back by others' assumptions about her identity, her behaviors, her intentions, and about her intelligence. It shows how much harm can be done to someone's personal growth by the weight of others' expectations of who they will grow to become. Her mother and the rest of her family have particular ideas about who Lily is, as does her best friend Shirley, as do her teachers at school and her other classmates. Lily herself has spent a long time sitting with these expectations and internalizing them, and even though she isn't fully comfortable or happy with who she has to be within them anymore, she hasn't yet had the opportunity or option of deciding for herself who she is without them. Something that she comes to learn pretty early on is that opportunity isn't something that's going to fall into her lap. It's something that she has to track down and secure for herself. Underlying this story of Lily's personal development is one of a more collective struggle, one shared throughout the entire country really, but especially consequential within Lily's own community in San Francisco's Chinatown. As we know, this book takes place in the 1950s, post-World War II and into the Cold War era. That is, in the heat of the Red Scare and anti-communist sentiments in North America, overshadowing Lily's own anxieties about her identity, about finishing high school, about drama with friends, about relationships, both the excitement of the new and worrying about leaving behind or growing out of the old, is the knowledge that her every move could be monitored by government officials who are already hot on her father's trail, accused of being a communist sympathizer and threatened with deportation. To even think about trying to explore your identity and become your own person in the heat of that moment is something sort of unimaginable. To make things so much worse for Lily, as I mentioned before, it seems that every individual thing she's coming to learn about herself is another reason to bring her under suspicion, for one reason or another. In spite of all of this, Lily is tired of making herself smaller and compromising on her own truths as she's coming to know them. To be open about those truths is something that takes her a little bit longer, but doing it quietly is another story altogether. This is where her personal journey in the book really begins to thrive, when she realizes to her excitement just how good at taking risks and keeping secrets she really is, right when it matters the most. Her streak of rebellion from the expectations hanging over her head begin when she finds a newspaper ad for a performance at the Telegraph Club, what she'll come to know as a local underground lesbian club in the city, and through a slightly convoluted, maybe only slightly less than legal series of events, opportunities, and choices, Lily finds herself in attendance, and nothing of what she's previously accepted about herself, based on others' prescriptions, seems like a sustainable facade to keep up for another moment. The very second she walks through the door of the Telegraph Club with her newfound friend Kath, there's no going back to the way she once was. For a time, she keeps this new side of herself on the down low, but there's only so long that the magic of freedom, of discovering a new piece of yourself, and such a vital piece of yourself, can be fully kept hidden and quiet. First of all, I'm just going to say this. I thought this book was a real achievement, and that was a really pleasant surprise. It's not necessarily that I didn't believe the hype I've seen surrounding it on social medias, but I'm always a little bit wary of the way that some books will be hyped to their absolute deaths online. More often than not, to me, that feels like a recipe for disaster and disappointment. Because no book is perfect, and social media buzz can and will make them out to be. And this book wasn't perfect in any way, but regardless, there was very little about this book I wish had been different. There were parts I enjoyed less than others, sure, but I thought Lo handled the complexities of the story she set out to write really, really well. The writing style is vivid, for both the setting side of things and for the characters, their interactions, their conversations, and their emotions. And this vividness really brought to life to me how important place can be to the way that we grow and the opportunities we have to progress. In particular, with regard to this, I wanted to bring our attention really briefly to the 5th chapter, when Lily goes into a supermarket outside of Chinatown and reads a snippet from one of the romance novels on their display rack, one that scandalously seems to center around 2 women who fall in love. It's near the end of this chapter that we're told that Lily feels exhilarated to have finally put together the last pieces to the puzzle of her identity, something that this risque novel has finally let her put a label on and define. I thought it quite telling that she has this realization outside of Chinatown, a place that represents to her both the comforts and restrictions of tradition and family. It's comforting because she has her place there. She has nothing to prove or to earn. But it's suffocating too, because in order for her to enjoy those comforts, she has to stay with being the same girl she's always been, the same girl she's always been expected to be while at home. The girl who she is coming to know is not truly her. What the supermarket offers to her is not a place to hide necessarily, although she still seeks out privacy. What she's really looking for there is anonymity. She can be whoever she wants, on her own time, on her own truth, and by her own watch. And best of all, she doesn't have to hide who that true Lily is. Instead, she's allowed to grow. Because there's comfort in freedom, too. And this one is a comfort without any prerequisites, like the comfort of routine and tradition. There aren't many places that offer Lily the same. At home, in Chinatown, at Shirley's family restaurant, at school, everyone has different ideas about who she is, who they want her to be, who she'll become. As the book goes on, Lily continues to seek out places where she gets to define herself before anyone else can do it for her. And before long, again, what she realizes is that there's no going back to the confines of other people's ideas of who she is or where she belongs. This book, to me, wasn't an easy read by any means, but not because I couldn't get on with the writing style or I didn't feel enough for the characters' stories. There is just so much going on in it, so much objective history, and the way that those histories play into the personal and internal struggles that Lily goes through throughout the novel hit me really hard. I read it relatively slowly, partly because it's been a bit of a crazy couple of weeks, and it was sometimes hard to pick it up to read just a couple of pages. Partially also, though, it didn't feel right to burn through it. The histories of the communities the book focuses on are loaded things, and judging by the amount of research, work, and care that Lowe put into finding their truths, having readers give due attention and respect to the realities of those stories, I think is one of the major goals that the book sets out to achieve. Reading it on a speedrun would have been possible, I guess, but in a way it does a disservice to the stories the book sets out to tell. I think there's a lot I would have missed out on, if not in the story itself, then in terms of letting what those histories are saying really sink in. I could have read Lily's story without taking the time to think about the real people whose experiences to some extent inspire Lily's own, but it wouldn't have made nearly the same impact. And I don't think it would have been fair to the people whose stories Lily is telling. Something else I noticed with regard to this, one of the reasons I think I found it hard to read this book quickly, was the way that the pace varies throughout the book. In a way, I think this really replicates the way that life moves around us. Sometimes it feels like we have 1,000 years to live, to work through our routines, even to meet challenges and to overcome them. And in other times, it feels like merely keeping on the heels of life is a challenge in itself. The more I thought about it, what I realized is that the book's pace alternates between slow and fast, and greatly depending on who Lily is in the moment. Whether she is the girl that everyone expects her to be, or her true self, the self who is learning to take risks and to find out who she is. The scene at the clothing store, the picnic she attends with Shirley and their other classmates, the time she spends at Shirley's parents' restaurant, and her evenings and mornings at home all seem sluggish and even boring. Lily's mind wanders in these places, and we get her thoughts more than her interactions with those she's spending the time with. Her attention moves to the waistcoat in the store, to the Tommy Andrews ad in the newspaper when Shirley shows her the restaurant's ad, and so on, as if she's merely waiting for life to move along, to see when she might be able to drag herself out of their ruts. On the other hand, Lily's time spent with Kath, the scene at the supermarket when she's reading, her sneaking out of the house for her excursions to the Telegraph Club, all of these seem to zip by. They're scenes full of action and conversation and decisions rather than just Lily's inner thoughts, and it gives them a sense of urgency and importance. It shows Lily to us as a girl who is finding her truth, herself, who is learning how to live with her own intention and good first in her mind. One part of the book in particular that felt like it moved really quickly, though, was the section near the end, after Lily's spotted leaving the Telegraph Club after the police raid, and she tries to come clean to her family about everything she's been doing, everything that she's coming to learn about herself, and about her budding relationship with Kath. It's this point where her internal and external worlds crash together, and to me it felt like everything was yelling, in constant motion. The way I sometimes feel when everything feels overwhelming and overloading, and I'd give anything for everything to just pause for 5 seconds to let me breathe and figure out at least one thing before life continues. In this portion of the book, Lily goes from being exactly who her parents have always thought her to be, to exposing herself as being what they'd think of as their worst nightmare, to being called a liar because they deny her the right to tell her truth, and it hurts more than a lie, to her making that decision that living that truth is more important to her than the small, confining comforts of their conditional love. She goes from being a dependent young teen to being completely left to her own devices to seek out protection from who knows where. It felt weird to me, as I was reading, that this section, such a monumental part of Lily's journey, seemed to move so quickly and be over and done with, and hardly be given the attention or page space that some of the other sections received. But as I thought about it more, I wondered if maybe that too was a meaningful choice on Lowe's part, In life, so often, just when it matters the most, we aren't given time to pause and to think and mull over where we move from here. Sometimes shit gets real, really fast. And if we don't keep up with it, and if we fail to make decisions as they need to be made, we don't grow. Lily could have done a lot of things when her mother told her that who she is was not an acceptable thing. But a lot of those things she could have done would have kept her exactly where she was. Instead, she chose to move, no matter how risky or dangerous or life-altering any movement might have proven to be. At this point, she knows for herself, becomes absolutely certain, that finding the safety in a lie is unsustainable, that living in the risk and danger of telling the truth is the only way to move forward, to continue to enjoy the freedom of figuring out who she is, no matter the consequences now that she's begun. Now, I wanted to step back a little bit from jumping around, to focus a little bit more on how effective I found this book, specifically as a work of historical fiction, rather than as, say, just a story of Lily's coming of age. That aspect was there too, of course, because yes, it's a story about a girl beginning to discover and understand her own sexuality, but more than that, it's a powerful representation of what that discovery could have looked like for countless young girls at that time, maybe even in Lily's exact situation. Lily's story, even just as a fictional individual's account of history, gives us a face and a name to put to the past, to remind us that the past is full of humans, and that each of those humans had a family and a story and a life, and they went through hardships just like we do, in spite of the years that separate us, and they made decisions that shaped the world that they lived in into the one we were born into. In this vein, something else this book did for me that I also really appreciated, as historical fiction can be so effective at doing, is that it illustrated the way that different communities are impacted by history in different ways. And it showed me how much I don't know, how much I have yet to learn about other people's experiences, both past and present. Obviously, that lesson in itself is a general one, but it isn't specific to this book or the specific community in question. But it does take care and attention as the author to achieve that effect. It often takes a personal interest and connection on the part of the writer because so much of history is hidden to those who didn't live it, whose parents and grandparents didn't live it, whose children won't continue to be impacted by its impacts. It can be really hard to crack into those close-held secrets, because where do you look? Where do you begin? Better than all of that, though, this book and the exposure to those truths made me want to know more and learn more about those histories beyond what was shared in the book, and beyond what is shared in so many history books, because I really only got a taste of what's there. With the leading hand into history that books like this one offer us, suddenly we're given this foundation, that starting place we needed to get our footing. We're given a source, a standard by which we might measure out later findings against, and make informed opinions about what we're getting, and where we're getting the whole truth, and where we might need to dig a little bit deeper, find out more before we make any assumptions. Walking into works like this one with an open mind is really important, because a lot of the time I think we pick up historical works because we have impressions and assumptions about the time period they tell about, based on the facts as they've been told to us previously. From there, we so often have expectations about what we're going to find, about the way the story is going to unfold. Sometimes I think we read a textbook description and a Wikipedia article or social media post, and we start to think we've got the basics down. When we pick up the book, we think, okay, based on these facts, this is a story I've heard before, right? But what I think this book, among others like it, does beautifully is quite simple. It tells the truth in a way that shows us that those few facts are never the whole picture. It's honest about the complexities, the untold stories of history, and all of these things, all of these little details, make it so clear how much more important it is that we dig into histories to find those truths, because they are almost always still there somewhere, and we have so much to learn from them. I think sometimes that books that tell the truth might actually surprise us more than they fulfill our expectations and assumptions. So, final verdict, I really enjoyed this book, most especially for how much attention and care Malinda Lo put into telling the truth. It is a unique book in that walking into it, I didn't expect the level of research and history that went into its writing, but I'm so grateful for how strong that aspect was. History really is the star of the show here, and to have that in a book that's also YA and also LGBT is really quite an achievement. I loved how many layers there were to the story, how true to life it was, in that each layer played a part in every other. To finish us off here today, as always, I will leave you with a couple of recommendations to move forward from here. If you loved the way that this book gave you a window into hidden histories and told the truth about communities whose pasts are often misunderstood, I have a few options for you. Firstly, Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys is a really beautifully written novel about the sinking of a Soviet submarine in 1945, and its telling is split between 4 perspectives, all of which become intertwined as the story moves along. Another pick might be Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosnay. This one jumps between 2 time periods, and for one, tells the story of a young girl named Sarah whose family is arrested and rounded up with other Jewish families in the Velodrome d'Hiver in 1942. The second storyline it follows is that of a journalist living in 2002 named Julia Jarmond, who learns of the event, sets out to write an article about it, and finds that she has a deeper and more personal connection to the event than she ever could have imagined. It is a really gorgeous book, one that I always want to reread, and I highly recommend. The last title I'd suggest in this kind of realm is The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Marianne Schaefer and Annie Barrows, which tells about a young woman writer in the mid-1940s named Juliet looking for inspiration for a new book. She begins corresponding with a man living on the remote island Guernsey who came into possession of one of her old books, and as the two write letters back and forth, she's drawn into the lives of himself and a close-knit group of his friends who created a spur-of-the-moment type of book club when caught out after curfew one night by the Germans occupying their town. Before long, Juliet decides to visit her pen pals on Guernsey with the dream of writing about them, and soon finds it harder than ever to say goodbye. It is such a lovely story, and one of my favorite comfort reads, and the movie is honestly such a gem too. Highly, highly recommend. What I find similar between these books especially is the way that they handle the histories they tell. They're accurate and careful and pay close attention to detail without my feeling like I'm reading a history textbook. They're careful to highlight the humanness in history, the fact that people who lived through the events we read about and write about were in fact human, without compromising on the careful research that went into making sure their stories are accurate and consistent. If you enjoyed the attention given in Lowe's book to LGBT communities and normalizing the idea that LGBT romance stories are not an invention of the 2010s, then I would also recommend one of my all-time favorite YA LGBT contemporary books, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Sons. Have I talked about this one before? I can't remember, but it stands to be talked about again. This book is beautiful in its simplicity. It's about 2 boys with philosopher's name growing up in the 1980s, coming to understand themselves, to accept themselves, and the very different ways in which they do. To me, the plot in this book is less significant than the personal and internal journeys the boys go through, and the close friendship and love that grows between them in the process. Life throws challenges and difficulties their way, as it does every one of us. And in the midst of it all, the 2 grow together, and then apart, and then back together again. This is probably one of the most quotable books I've ever read. The prose is incredibly poetic, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And it too is one of my comfort reads. It's a book that reminds me of what it is to be young, and to be hurt, but also to have hope, and feel peace, and to be in love. As a teen, this book meant so much to me, and I don't even think I can explain why. It just hit me at the right time, in the right moment, and I can't recommend it enough. My last rec for this month is This One Summer, a graphic novel by Mariko Tamaki and Jillian Tamaki, which tells of Rose, a girl who spends every summer with her family at their summer beach house, where Rose spends time with her summertime friend Wendy. For this summer, Rose spends more time trying to block out the sound of her parents fighting and coming to terms with the reality of what it means to grow up, and to grow up in this world as a girl. This is another one that I need to read again, but I remember really enjoying it. So, that's the cap on another month together. I hope you enjoyed tagging along with me this month on Malinda Lowe's Last Night at the Telegraph Club. I hope that it taught you something. even if just the lesson that historical fiction and history can be a lot of different things, but they are anything but boring. Thank you so much for your support this month, and until next time for our December launch, take good care and happy reading. The Off the Shelf podcast is a proud member of the Ordinary Podcasting Network. To learn more about this podcast or the network, please visit ordinarypodcast.com. Finally, thank you for listening, and if you haven't already, please subscribe or leave us a comment. Thank you so much, and take care.